I recently decided to redecorate my apartment, and in my search for new furniture, this thing kept happening, whether I was browsing for vintage pieces online or shopping in a retail store like this one. I kept seeing objects that looked really similar, and these same two words kept coming up again and again: mid-century modern. It turns out that furniture inspired by designs from the 1950s is everywhere today. So why has mid-century design remained so popular for so long?
The modern designer creates beauty through simplicity to create a new look to American efficiency.
Mid-century modern is a decorating style that began in the 1940s and endured into the early 70s.
But actually, even stepping back a little bit before that, there was the Bauhaus and all the designers who were working at that time, but their time was cut short because of the war.
So in fact, mid-century isn't exactly accurate because one needs to think about the developments of the 1920s and one needs to think about the consequences of war.
With the end of World War II in 1945, the world began to rebuild and reimagine itself. The post-war economic boom also meant that Americans and Canadians had a lot more money to spend. People started moving into new suburban houses, buying muscle cars, and having babies. Lots and lots of babies. And along with this cultural revolution came a design revolution. Designers harnessed new wartime technologies, materials, and manufacturing methods to create furniture that was completely new.
Designs in straight, delicate lines. Designs in graceful curves. Beauty of function as well as beauty of form.
So there were a lot of magazines and advertising that would show how people could be living. And it really was geared towards this new identity of how to live after the war and really bringing people past it so that way they could think about the future and where they were going.
Homes have more than new plans. They have new patterns for living.
I think when you see things now, everybody's just recycling everything. They didn't have something to look back on and say, oh, I want to make it like that. It was a fresh beginning. And they were experimenting. They were experimenting with shapes.
For example, with Charles and Ray Eames, a lot of their chairs were made out of plywood, and they could start shaping them so they really kind of fit the scale of the body. Somebody could just sort of relax in them. But I think it was a new opportunity to move away from kind of hard wood chairs that were really not conducive to the shape of the body, but to really take on new forms because of the technologies being used.
There was an awareness of the sculptural potential of furniture. People had no expectation of this unprecedented furniture. People were flabbergasted and entranced by it.
Designers used wood, fiberglass, metal, and plywood to form clean lines and gentle curves that mimic the shape of the human body. Just look at Eero Saarinen's womb chair. The chair has a molded fiberglass frame that is upholstered in fabric and set on chrome legs. Saarinen designed it after another famous architect and furniture designer, Florence Knoll, asked him to make a chair that she could really curl up in.
There was just something of a respect for the material. You would allow the material to do the speaking for you. But they also thought very ergonomically. They thought about the size of the body and how the piece was going to be used.
And there's that famous saying that the architect Louis Sullivan gave the world: form follows function. It doesn't mean that the chair is the equivalent of a screwdriver or a hammer, but it's on that side of function and the utility of things doing a job.
And with the Cold War raging between the West and the USSR, American furniture was even used as propaganda, mass-produced and held up by institutions like the Museum of Modern Art as the pinnacle of good design, proof that capitalism was superior to communism.
And there was the notion of democratic and patriotic consumerism, that Americans and Canadians owed their governments their allegiance by buying products made within their countries.
Our homes acquire new grace, new glamour, new accommodations, expressing not only the American love of beauty, but also the basic freedom of the American people.
But by the 70s, the style began to go out of fashion, but not for long.
Mid-century modern furniture, to me, has always been in the background. It has never really fully gone away.
The phrase mid-century modern was actually coined in 1984 by author Kara Greenberg, who used it as a title for her book about 1950s furniture. The book was a hit, and the phrase totally stuck. And shortly after the book came out, furniture from the 50s and 60s was back in vogue. By the 90s, a lot of mid-century designs had gone out of production, and collectors were selling authentic pieces for a lot of money. During the 70s and 80s, mid-century furniture manufacturers like Knoll and Herman Miller had shifted their focus to office furniture. But by the early 90s, that market had stagnated. They saw the renewed public interest in mid-century furniture as an opportunity that they could capitalize on. And so they began reissuing many iconic mid-century designs. All of a sudden, mid-century design was everywhere. And in 1999, Time magazine named the Eames molded plywood chair the best design of the 20th century. Today, shops like West Elm, CB2, and IKEA are full of mid-century inspired pieces, but there's still a huge market for the real thing too. Scroll through Pinterest or Instagram and you'll find thousands of posts tagged mid-century modern. The term is now a marketing tactic ubiquitous with modern style.
A lot of the appeal about why mid-century modern design still works today is that there is a simplicity to it.
There's something about the shape of a line, so we can mix that with other pieces of furniture very, very successfully.
It goes with everything. It's stylish, it's sexy.
In some ways, I like to think of it as being sophisticated.
There's just something kind of cool right now about that era. There's something about the scale and the comfort, the accessibility. There's so many great places that these pieces of furniture are available now.
The resurgence of mid-century modern design was, to my mind, driven by nostalgia. The other reason is that the design that we associate with the term mid-century modernism is good design.
And these pieces, they almost sometimes look so new that sometimes people don't even realize that they come from a different time, 50, 60, 70 years ago. Somehow they look like they're of our time right now.
And although some designs have become so popular and so mass-produced that they are bordering on cliché, looking at you, Noguchi coffee table, mid-century modern doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon.
The fact that it has endured as an aesthetic says that whatever the designers achieved had staying power.
But I think there's no end to the amount of creativity that architects and designers and individuals will have with how they use those things.